Sensei Elijah of Oni Martial Arts Calgary. So today I wanted to talk about knife work, and specifically this is in the category of videos where I sort of talk about ways we can modify our solo training a little bit through our equipment to better personalize our solo training so that we can much more easily reach our martial arts training goals. So with that, what I'm really going to be talking about is sort of how I developed and changed my solo knife training over the years. So with that in mind, we're going to start off talking sort of about the training weapons that I use, and then we'll move on to talk sort of about the sort of targeting equipment that we can use. So to get started, I come very much from a background of realistic self-defense. So one of the most important things I think with our solo training equipment, and specifically, especially when it has to do with knife work, is the realism behind it. So when I say the realism behind it, I sort of mean that it looks like, behaves like a knife. It's very important that it kind of does those things because it helps give us a respect for the sort of danger associated with that. If we're training our knife work and we're not taking the danger presented by that weapon seriously, we're not training effectively to use any of our techniques or strategies to deal with those things. So we really need to approach it as if we were realistically being attacked with a real knife. If we don't do that, we're just setting ourselves up for failure, in my mind. So I'm really just going to be sharing sort of my opinions on it, but I definitely think that realism is by far the most important thing that you could be training when you're doing your knife work. It makes for the more realistic the equipment is, definitely the better. So with that, part of the reason why that realism is so important is the realism helps us kind of, with a blade, with a knife, it helps us understand the edge alignment and the edge awareness so that we understand where that blade is and where it's dangerous to us. Just so I can quickly grab something. I have this guy. He's a Sykes Fairbairn rubber knife. So if I'm using him, I can very obviously see that I'm not set up with the edge pointed where it needs to be. I'm also aware of how it sits in my hand, and I can try and do weird things to make it work so that it will cut still, but understanding that blade alignment and that sort of blade awareness kind of just right out of the gate helps me better understand how to hold it in my hand and where it remains dangerous as I move with it. The overall material that the weapon is made out of can also make a big difference. Because this is rubber, it bends. So if I wanted to train something like a knife disarm, if I put any force on this knife, it tends to bend, and it bends pretty easily. Now what's nice about that is it means that my equipment definitely won't break, but it's not very realistic to expect that a knife would bend when I put pressure on it. So there's a little bit of lack of realism there in terms of the material it's made out of, as well as just the way it behaves. When force is put on it, it doesn't behave like an actual knife would, or like an actual dangerous solid piece of equipment would. So again, talking about the realism, having a very realistic appearance to your training weapon can make a huge difference, because coming in with a sort of mindset of danger is a lot easier if the thing you're looking at looks dangerous. So if I want to develop a healthy respect for a knife, if I train with something that looks a lot like a knife, it's easier for me to get into that mindset that I'm training for this. So with that sort of healthy respect and the realistic experience, the realistic appearance of the weapon, it really does look a lot like a knife. It's designed specifically after the Sykes Fairbairn World War II model sort of knife, maybe World War I. I'd have to check that to be sure. But what's nice about that is this has a very real appearance to a knife model that actually exists in the world that you can get. So if I want to, let's say, train with this tool, but the weapon that I actually carry in my day-to-day life is this guy, there's a huge difference. This is a double-sided knife. This is a single-sided knife. There's a difference in the handle length. There's a difference in the sort of little hand guard, and there's even a difference in terms of the blade length and weight. So if I wanted to train for using this knife in my day-to-day life, and this is the one I'm using, it won't be super true to form. What I mean by that, I won't be training myself to use that knife as effectively as I could be. Just the range alone, changing that 4 inches makes a huge difference. There's a reason why boxers with a longer reach tend to have an advantage over other fighters. So, talking about that realism now, I'd like to pull out some of the different training knives that I have, and then kind of going over some of the pros and cons of them, and then ways that I've modified them over time. So, alright, so getting started, we have this rubber knife here. Now, it's designed after a realistic version of a knife, so it's a great thing to train with, and especially the way it's designed. It does its function almost perfectly, although it bends. Definitely when we hit into the target, we can see that it doesn't bend, it just hits in. So, right off the bat, this is already a pretty good tool. I can definitely use it for my edge alignment. The handle is exactly how the handle would really how it would really be in terms of shape. So I do get an actual feeling for what it might be like to hit into something with this sort of knife design. Now, even if this was, let's say, exactly what we want to train with, there's other ways to think about when we're training with it. For instance, most of us might have to conceal the knife and then deploy from there. So if we have to work from that sort of assumption, then we need to know where it is that our knife will sit, whether it's in a pocket, on the belt, as a neck knife, and then make that part of our training so that now as we come through, that becomes part of the technique, where we both put the weapon away, pull out, and then continue to go. Because even here, as you can see, if I set it up the wrong way, or if I'm not used to training with it properly, I can wind up getting myself caught. So training for those things to make sure that they don't happen, or at the very least are very less likely to happen, is definitely ideal, especially for whatever it is we have to pull this out for. So that would be reference to the fact that if we are concealing the weapon, and especially that the plastic knife is actually pretty good to train with in most instances, especially when it has that sort of look to it. But now when we're pulling out this actually sort of almost sharp one, as we're going through for techniques, you can see that he doesn't really damage Bob too much. I'm not worried about cutting. Although it has an edge to it, it's not likely to cut. And even on the stabs, I can get some pressure in, but I'd want to be careful because depending on how good of a job I did with grinding down the edge, there might still be a chance of me damaging my other equipment. But even then, something like this becomes very important for other techniques that we might do as we train them, because now we can start to see and feel on our body when we mess up, and we'll get that sort of false cut sensation to know, we messed up. So then as I go through here, I know where I need to watch myself to avoid any kind of injury. So I've been doing this for a long time, and I have my preset patterns, so I'm not too worried about cutting my own hand and switching this up, going through. I have my timing down for that, but that was something I worked on over time. And with a more sharp implement, we're able to better work into our heads as we go through and start practicing these things and deciding what it is we do want to use and include. When it has this sharp edge, when we can feel that we messed up and cut, we can start to determine what are high risk versus low risk techniques. And we can understand how we can better move the knife with our body to prevent ourselves from getting injured. So from here, as I pull up, even this is a chance to cut myself. As I pointed out, if my hand isn't out of the way, I can wind up cutting it. So those are all things I can start to safely practice and get a feeling for when I mess up. And especially when I start training fast. It's forgiving to my mistakes. But eventually, I'd probably recommend to most people that you want to move up to practicing with a live knife. Now, the only problem with that is I don't really want to cut Bob up because he was an extremely expensive piece of equipment. So although now I get to work with the proper size I really have to work more on the technical aspects. I don't want to go for speed too much like I did before. Partly because there's the more dangerous aspect of if I mess up, I will hurt myself. But if I trained appropriately before getting to this point, that shouldn't be as much of a danger. But I also don't want to damage my equipment. So just taking away that risk is a pretty good idea. So what I would recommend for that is these styles of trainer flippers. So this one's completely dull. Now these things are great to practice with. Especially most of them are designed after some kind of knife type that you can actually get. And you can use them. So again, if we're talking about even just with the weapon deployment, a belt knife or a neck knife is very different from a flipper. We have to both pull it out, orient it properly, and then open the knife, which is a lot of steps to take, especially under a high-stress situation. So starting to get that training in when you have something you can practice with, even if I mess up now and drop the knife, I'm not in any danger of cutting myself. Which becomes a very valuable training tool because you will mess up. Regardless of how careful you try to be, there's a very good chance that eventually mistakes will be made, whether through negligence, tired, or just unfortunate circumstances. So, this is typically where I like to put my training. Now I can really work with a knife that better suits what it is I carry day to day. It allows me to train to deploy the weapon right away. And what's nice about this is if you don't find a trainer that kind of fits to the knife that you carry yourself, you can make one just as easily by buying 2 versions of the knife that you plan on carrying and then taking one and just grinding down the edge. And as soon as you do that and make sure that it's safe to train with, then you can use that and you don't have to worry anymore about damaging your equipment. But it has that little more step of realism of retention system in place. It has the same opening style. So whether it's button operated, spring assist, thumb pad, or a clip, whatever it is, it'll be the same as to what it is that you're using. So really, if you can afford it, really trying to make sure that you buy 2 versions of the same knife and then turning one into a practice knife is a great way to then practice on your own equipment without worrying about damaging it and getting a much more realistic training scenario out of it. Alright, so one more in regards to the knife. So this guy is just a rattan stick that I have that I cut down and fixed up so that I can use again to that same sort of knife proportion. I'm pretty sure I mentioned it before. But anyway, as we're coming through here, this can become pretty ideal. Now I'm able to cut this to the same sort of length that I need, and it has a pretty good use for it. Now, on this one you can see I use tape to create a handle for it, to give it a tip, and then even to determine the edge side. So now as I move with this, it does a lot of those things that I said are important with our training knives. The only difference, of course, being that the shape is a little bit off. It's very rounded. The handle is nothing like most other knife handles you would find. But definitely for at least training with a little bit more, it's better than just taking a stick. Just applying that tape, something that'll stay on there and allow me to work with it so that I can better train for my edge awareness, so I can determine where the tip is, and all those other good things can now become a big part of my training. So, especially if you're looking to save a few bucks, just taking a stick and then using that as training equipment and then modifying it just slightly can give you a lot of those benefits we talked about before that all of those fancier knife models gave us the opportunity. Alright, so we have Bob here, and as you see, I've had Bob for maybe 4 years now. One of the very first things I did with him was actually draw all of this stuff on him. So part of the reason why is just it helps me training with my precision. So I have certain vital targets that I try to aim for when I'm doing these knife techniques, so I just drew them on him for quick reference, and now there's something I can just look at quickly. I don't have to do guesswork, and especially when I put it right up against most of my training knives, I can see immediately if I hit on the spot or not. I don't have to then try and guesswork how well I aimed. As long as I draw these on well, I know exactly how well I was on target. or if I was on target at all. So this is a great way to train just a little bit of extra accuracy. And all I really did was give him the center line to help determine that. And then, of course, you can split it other lines if you want to. So you can determine your quadrants of attack. You can put on all of your kyoshi points, your pressure points, the sweet spots, the weak points in the body. You can illustrate them as you want, and then it just becomes that much more valuable to you as a training tool, because now he has all these really great references for the places that you want to hit. And depending on your art and what it is that you're hitting with, that becomes very valuable. And it definitely doesn't take too much to add on to him, and it adds something nice. And he's already such a great training tool because he has this general human shape. When I'm hitting in, I can get some really good reference to see if my hand was in the right position or not as I hit, and what it would look like on an actual body. And I can move him and change things around and really get a feeling for it. So it's awesome. Bob is one of my favorite pieces of training equipment, especially for such a variety of martial arts that I train. He's good for weapons as well as empty hand and everything else. Except maybe grappling, but that's just because I don't want to break him. But even then, for something like training a wrap around the neck, he's great for. But let's also look at this other piece of equipment. Alright, so, I don't know if this has a name. I'm sure somebody's called this something before. But especially for weapons training, at least, I find him pretty helpful. So this is really just something you can create with just a little bit of tape and a wall. I had to use masking tape just because I didn't want to damage my walls at all, just because they're kind of made out of paint, and I just added these black lines to make it visually a bit easier to see. But now as I go through here, again, I have this very physical reference to help me as I go through and do techniques so I can train my precision. So I know where it touched on the tape, I know when to pull off, I know what angle I want to hit at, the most success, I can do the straight line. So all that he really is just the straight line down the body. I gave this, which depending on the size of opponent you want to go for, this can either be your top of head line. So this is the top of the head you want to hit below here. These can become the eyes. This is the throat. Or you can do it the other way, where this is instead the throat, and then this is a little bit lower down. So top of the neck, bottom of the neck, going straight across here on this line, coming down from the sternum, making this the bottom part of the chest plate, right in that little notch right here, the solar plexus, making this a spot that we target. And then going down right up until we hit about groin level, which is where we split off into the legs, which I could add on if I wanted to. And what's really nice about this is it's so cheap and easy to make, so just with a little bit of tape, maybe some markers to help me see it better depending on the color contrast between the wall and the tape, I can now create extra targets. So I have my eyes up here, I have my throat line, this is for the leaf gland, the armpit. Right here we have our liver on the left side. Left side for me, right side for the human body. So now as I'm coming through and doing my techniques, as I'm going through doing some of my generic line work, practicing my crosses, my diagonals, my opposite directions, now as I want to, I can come in for my stabs. Pull through, hit, see if I'm getting it right. So this is now an easy way to train with speed if I want to, or precision. But because it's your wall, depending on what your wall is made out of, this might become something of higher level training, in that you want to wait until you're confident that going fast won't make you damage your wall. Now, depending on what it is I'm doing, I have pretty good faith that I'll probably do okay. But regardless, it's still dangerous. So be careful. Yeah. Anyway, something like this. weapon's very valuable, or even just training little things. I can use him for a variety of drills. Even just, if I want to train really close quarters, straight up against the wall. So, even if you can't afford something like a fancy Bob model over there, even just creating something like this on your wall space creates a great training tool that you can use for a variety of drills. And of course, there's other ways to really add to this. If you wanted to, you could add like little pads so you can really practice punching. So, yeah. Part of what I really enjoy with things like this is it really doesn't take much to improve our training overall. Whether it's through a little bit of visualization, creativity, and creating our equipment. So even for this guy, if I really wanted to, I could make a human figure sort of shape, but I already have Bob for that, so instead I decided to go more for geometrical shape, lines, and stuff like that. Because I'm usually not too worried about training my mental faculties to determine that this is a good spot to poke, this is a good spot to poke, and then worrying about not knowing where it is because I have Bob already. But even just stuff like this is a fun way for either yourself or your students to kind of practice their techniques and their forms. So almost the same idea as a Wing Chun dummy going through. It's just a great little thing to do. Let's talk about some other ways that we can sort of train ourselves in a bit more of an imaginative way. This obviously kind of comes out of more boxing with sort of moving side to side. If you've ever seen those sort of boxing videos where they work on that bag, you get a hit, shoots through, they dodge either way. Fun stuff. But it also works for knife work. So as we're going through now, we can train on a bit more of a moving target, which, depending on how you set it up and what you use, can be a pretty good piece of equipment. You can find ways to have it react a bit more unexpectedly. But now you can work on a moving target as you're now going through, which can of course be good practice for training to hit somebody on the hand, moving your own body appropriately, for blocking, getting back. Perhaps trying to aim more. I hit the secondary piece on it instead of the first. All kinds of fun stuff. Just something that you can hang from the wall. Of course, if you're going to set up a few different ones, it'd be another great way to do it. But yeah, piece of equipment like this, great just to train to hit a moving target, which definitely, when we're training this sort of stuff, especially if we're expecting to use it on an unwilling opponent, they're typically not trying to let themselves get hit, so there will be movement. So even just that little bit of practice, even if the lines become very predictable, and it's obviously not quite like a person, it still gives us a feeling of something moving that we have to track. Cool. And you can train with. Alright, so back again on different sorts of targeting equipment that we can use when we're talking about our knife work specifically. This comes from some grandmaster in one of the Filipino styles. I can't remember which one, but honestly, what a smart teacher to develop this sort of equipment. Just a rope attached to some sticks. This becomes a great tool for target acquisition, dodging, hitting. Just a great piece. So even in the way that it functions, each one moves a little bit differently from the other. So different weights of sticks makes a huge difference. Even just applying tape to some of the sticks and not all of them, I can use that to create these as my target areas when I'm hitting. And then the rest could be just something that I'm trying to avoid. As I'm going through now, I'm only allowed to hit wherever the tape is. And then I have 3 different targets, 3 different things to attack, and only 2, or maybe 1 I can hit myself. Yeah, what a great piece of training equipment this one can be. And especially the harder you hit it, the more absolutely sporadic the movement can become on it. But just something like a rope and some sticks. What a great piece of equipment. Alright, so on this same training tool that we were with earlier, just with a single stick instead, if you were to go off that same sort of rule where the tape is on either end and I can only hit the tape parts, not the bare stick, we could even say here now that this would be the best time to put in our slightly sharper stick, our slightly sharper knife. Because now as we're training with it, as we're going through, this is a very dynamic piece of equipment that we have to react to. So our movements are going to wind up being a bit more hectic and centered around survival. So this is a great opportunity to find out if when we're in movement, if we're doing anything silly where we might wind up hurting ourselves. So even as I'm coming through now, as it starts to get more crazy, and I'm trying to avoid several different movements. Whoa. It becomes a great way now practice to see if as I'm moving through, if I'm doing anything wrong that would hurt myself using even just my own knife. Because definitely with this really sort of sporadic movement, you can see it performing here. If I'm not really set up to react to this in the right way, I could wind up hurting myself just from trying to survive how crazy the movement is as it comes towards me. So if I'm not prepared for that and I'm just swinging my knife around, trying to not get hit, not paying attention to what I'm really doing, just trying to survive, I could wind up hurting myself, which in a real situation is probably more realistic to what it is I would actually be doing. So training ourselves right out of the gate to just kind of be more prepared for that and to see if we're already making any mistakes, really helpful in our overall understanding and learning of technique in the long run. Oh. So kind of along these same lines of thinking that if we want a weapon that kind of better suits what it is we're going to carry ourselves, it's also kind of important to consider what our martial art considered to be the weapon of choice in the style. So for instance, things like HEMA have a different sort of idea of what a knife looks like compared to, say, a Japanese or Filipino style, different styles of blades, right? So something like that can be determined by the country of origin, the weapon most commonly used by soldiers of a certain army at a certain period in time, or even something as simple as one grandmaster preferring one style of blade over another and making that the official blade of the style. So for something like that, now when we look at our own personal solo training, we have to consider if we're using a weapon that's the most ideal towards what our our own teachings in the arts that we train are, or if we want to kind of move outside of that, and then understanding how that changes things for us. So you have to make kind of your own choice there. If you quite enjoy the style of weapon that your art teaches, or if you want to change it up a bit, and understanding how and why you might do that. So that's something you can explore in your own solo training as you try out different pieces of equipment, and you kind of work through that stuff on your own. So yeah, third cut. All right, now to just sort of talk about a Wing Chun dummy. I really like these things. They're pretty awesome. I myself am not really a trained student of Wing Chun. It's not a style. I like it, and I find it quite helpful and practical for a lot of things to train. But I haven't found it quite my liking, quite my style that I enjoy training. So although I appreciate the art and the things that it can teach me, I don't really know how to use this dummy the way that a Wing Chun student does, so forgive me if it doesn't look super great. But now as I come through and use this piece of equipment now for my blade work, it's really awesome because I have the ability now to treat these arms as the obstructions that I want. So even this kind of stuff, and something like Bob, if I was to be able to add these sorts of wooden arms and joints and such to work around, something to pretend is a sort of fence where I've got to work around the obstruction as I go through, or as I'm trying to hit the ends of the arms, the hands, and such, as I'm now coming through for other techniques. Oh. Even there you can see, as I was coming through, I managed to slash my wrist. So again, a very helpful thing to train. As I'm now starting to get kind of more accustomed to the idea of someone blocking, if I try to come in to block that and I'm not strong enough to move it, I could wind up cutting myself because I wasn't able to do the movement that I meant to. So building into a piece of equipment that helps give you a little bit of that resistance, or that little bit of pretend structure that an opponent would have, can really help set you up for better success in your solo training, regardless of what style you use. If you have one of these, they're a great thing to practice on no matter what kind of art you do. I mean, even now as I train as a very close-in boxer, as I'm coming in for techniques, understanding where these arms are and how I could get out of the way of them, throw my shots. Whereas I could move my arms around them, making sure I don't get too caught up. So yeah, I quite appreciate these Wing Chun Mukjong dummies. There's probably definitely better videos of people showing you how to use them for something like blade work. But as a piece of training equipment, it's really great. So I can also, again, do things to modify it. Tape is always one of my favorite answers because it's so cheap and easy. You can do stuff like add the geometrical lines, you can put numbers on it, you can give something there to help give you a reference for what it is you're trying to build. So for instance, if I was trying to get a sensation of, I want a geometrical tape line that goes this way, if the rest of it is wood and there's just a tape line that goes here, I'll be able to feel if I hit that tape line and move it through on the knife, because there'll be an auditory cue for me to know that I've hit it, because this sounds very different from here. So even in that way, I can help train myself to know if I've hit the right target, as well as obviously the visual cues to it, and something to just practice on and work with, even if I wind up not becoming a master at aiming for those lines. Practicing it and working on it becomes very helpful to different techniques you want to do. So stuff like putting the lines on, adding numbers, drawing faces on these guys. Again, little maybe like 1-2 spots, a couple facial features. On the arms, if you were to throw something like a sleeve on so that you could grab and pull on clothes, as if you had like a judo gi. Something like that could also be very helpful to train with. So, I hope you found this helpful. Give you a couple of tips, tricks, or maybe ideas on ways you can maybe modify a little bit with your own solo at-home training, whether it's through the sort of training knife that you're using or the sort of targeting equipment that you're using, maybe giving you a whole new idea of something that you've never seen before. That would be really cool. But I know there's other things like this out there, but I know that they're also hard to find at times, so I really hope that this helped maybe show some people something, or at least gave you some creative ideas of things that you can add to your own training equipment to better help you train your martial arts and get more out of your solo training when you're by yourself at home, or even if you're at your dojo and you want to do something that maybe, if you're the sensei or you're a trusted member of the dojo, maybe just a suggestion for something to play with. Because, I mean, the more ways that we can better our own training, if there's a better way to do it, we should always go for it. If there's any way that we can better our own training on our own time, or at class or what have you, we should always strive for it, because any time that we get to improve ourselves, I mean, that's why such a great number of us are in martial arts. It's for the self-improvement aspect. So, I mean, if there's just better ways to do it, or more intuitive or fun ways, just things that'll switch it up to maybe add a little bit more life into our training, those are always great goals to have. So, this is Sensei Elijah with Oni Martial Arts, Calgary. I hope you guys found something kind of fun and informative in what I was talking about. But even if you didn't, or maybe if you have some better ideas, I'd love to see them down below in the comments. I really do just love martial arts training, so I hope I can produce more videos that some people might get something out of. But without any further ado, I hope you have yourself a great day, and go play.